It's been more than 3 decades since Vivian Ward stepped out in that unforgettable red dress in Edward. Lewis overcame his fear of heights to climb a fire escape for love. Now, the dream that fans thought would never come true is finally here. Pretty Woman is back. Julia Roberts and Richard Gere are reuniting for Pretty Woman 2 in 2026, and the first look has already sent the internet into a frenzy. The romance that defined an era is returning, and the big question on everyone's mind is, what kind of story could possibly follow such a legendary beginning? When the first film came out in 1990, it wasn't just a hit, it became a cultural landmark. The story of a wealthy businessman and a spirited young woman from completely different worlds struck a chord with audiences everywhere. Julia Roberts' charm as Vivian made her an instant star, while Richard Gere's subtle, charismatic performance as Edward melted hearts. The dialogue, the fashion, the music, everything about Pretty Woman seemed to capture a perfect moment in Hollywood's romantic comedy history. The chemistry between the leads was so effortless that for years, fans begged for a sequel, but Hollywood kept saying no. Part of the film's magic was in its ending, Edward showing up with flowers, ready to rescue Vivian, only for her to remind him she was rescuing him right back. It was the perfect close to a love story. Many feared that trying to extend it might ruin what made it special. That's why the announcement of Pretty Woman 2 has come as such a surprise. It's not just happening, it's bringing back the original stars, reuniting Roberts and Gere after 36 years. That kind of casting doesn't happen often, and it's a big reason why the excitement is so high. From the very first stills and short trailer clips, it's clear that the sequel isn't trying to replace the original, it's leaning into its legacy. The first look teases elegant city backdrops, with Vivian in modern but still glamorous fashion choices, a nod to her character's transformation in the first film. Edward appears older, wiser, but still exuding that calm confidence we remember. The camera lingers on their glances at each other, and even without dialogue, you can feel the history between them. The way the trailer has been crafted tells us a lot about the direction of this sequel. It doesn't rush to show plot points or action. Instead, it's about mood, music swelling, familiar melodies returning, and close-ups on two faces that once defined romance for a generation. There's an unspoken message here. This is a film about people who have lived a life since we last saw them, and now we're about to see what's changed, what's been lost, and what remains. The decision to bring back Roberts and Gere, rather than recast or reboot, is smart. It gives the film an authenticity that fans crave. In the years since Pretty Woman, both actors have had long, varied careers, and yet their pairing still carries a sense of magic. This time, they're not playing fresh-faced lovers just discovering each other. They're bringing decades of real-world experience into their performances. That's going to give their on-screen romance a depth it couldn't have had in 1990. The buzz surrounding Pretty Woman 2 isn't just about nostalgia, it's about curiosity. How will Vivian and Edward's story be told in a modern world? Will the film keep its fairy tale charm, or will it explore the realities of love over time? The first look is careful not to give away too much, but it does hint at a film that wants to be more than just a trip down memory lane. It's aiming to capture the same emotional spark while showing that even the most magical love stories have new chapters worth telling. By focusing the first section of the trailer on atmosphere rather than plot, the filmmakers are signaling that this sequel is about connection. It's about two people who changed each other's lives in unforgettable ways, meeting again with all the weight of the years between them. That's the hook that will draw in both old fans and a whole new generation curious about why this story has endured for so long. When we talk about romantic comedies that left a permanent mark on Hollywood, Pretty Woman is always near the top of the list. It wasn't just another feel-good love story, it became a cultural event. Back in 1990, the movie rewrote the rules of the genre. Romantic comedies before it were often light and formulaic, but Pretty Woman dared to be bold. It combined humor, heart, and a modern Cinderella twist wrapped in an unapologetically glamorous package. Vivian wasn't your typical romantic heroine. She was vibrant, independent, and unafraid to speak her mind. Edward, on the other hand, wasn't just a charming rich man, he was vulnerable in ways that made him human. Together, Julia Roberts and Richard Gere brought these characters to life with a chemistry so electric. It practically lit up the screen. The impact was immediate and long-lasting. The film became one of the highest-grossing romantic comedies of all time, and the soundtrack, led by Roy Orbison's Oh, Pretty Woman, became an instant classic. Fashion from the movie influenced trends for years: the red opera gown, the polka dot dress, the thigh-high boots. Every detail seemed iconic, cementing the film's place in pop culture. And perhaps most importantly, it gave audiences a love story that felt both larger than life and strangely believable. You could root for Vivian and Edward because in their own imperfect ways they made each other better over the decades. Pretty Woman became more than a movie, it became a reference point. Scenes were parodied in television shows, quoted in other films, and remembered by fans who could recite the lines by heart. Big mistake, huge, became part of the everyday lexicon. The image of Edward climbing the fire escape to rescue Vivian was replayed in countless tributes. And yet, despite its enduring popularity, Hollywood resisted the temptation to make a sequel. That decision, in many ways, kept the magic intact. Fans could imagine their own happily ever after for Vivian and Edward without it ever being rewritten on screen. That's why the arrival of Pretty Woman 2 is so significant. It's not just about continuing a story. It's about revisiting a cultural phenomenon. For the generation that grew up with the film, it's a chance to see beloved characters again. For younger audiences, it's an opportunity to discover why the movie still gets referenced more than 30 years later. The fact that Julia Roberts and Richard Gere are returning makes it even more meaningful. They're not just reprising roles, they're stepping back into a cinematic legacy. The challenge for the sequel is balancing that legacy with the demands of modern storytelling. Back in 1990, the world was different. Romance movies didn't have to contend with the fast pace of streaming culture or the cynical tone of many contemporary scripts. Pretty Woman worked because it embraced sincerity. It wasn't afraid to be heartfelt, to believe in love, to give us moments that were pure fantasy yet grounded in human emotion. That's a tricky balance to strike today, but the very fact that the sequel exists shows there's still a hunger for that kind of storytelling. The filmmakers seem well aware of the responsibility they're carrying. The first look images and trailer tease a film that respects where it came from. The visual palette feels familiar, warm, rich, and romantic. The music hints at callbacks to the original score. Even the way the camera frames Vivian and Edward feels like a deliberate nod to the way audiences remember them. It's nostalgia done with intention. Not just as a gimmick. What makes Pretty Woman's legacy so strong is that it didn't just tell a love story, it told a story about transformation. Vivian wasn't saved in the traditional sense. She took control of her own life, and Edward learned to open his heart. That mutual growth made their relationship feel real, even within the fantasy framework. If the sequel can tap into that same core, two people changing each other for the better, it has the potential to resonate just as deeply as the buzz builds for Pretty Woman 2. The legacy of the original acts as both a foundation and a challenge. The bar is high, and the expectations are enormous. But that's the beauty of a story like this, it thrives on risk. Back in 1990, nobody expected a romantic comedy about a businessman and a Hollywood Boulevard free spirit to become a timeless hit. Now, in 2026, history might just repeat itself. Asterisk the moment the first look footage for Pretty Woman 2 dropped, it was clear this sequel wasn't just relying on nostalgia, it was weaving it into something fresh. Every frame feels like a love letter to the original, yet layered with new textures that speak to the passage of time. The very first shot sets the tone, a sweeping view of Los Angeles at golden hour. The city bathed in warm light, much like the opening of the 1990 classic. But this time, the skyline is different, more modern, busier, almost symbolic of how the world has changed since Vivian and Edward's first chapter. Then comes the moment fans have been waiting for: Julia Roberts as Vivian, stepping out of a sleek black car. The camera catches her in profile, her hair now a deeper, richer shade of auburn, styled with effortless elegance. She's wearing a tailored cream coat that sways as she walks, a subtle nod to the iconic white and blue ensemble. From the polo match scene in the original, there's no dialogue, just a faint instrumental echo of Roy Orbison's O, Pretty Woman reimagined with a slower, more romantic arrangement. It's a clever choice, recognizable, but fresh enough to signal this is a new story. Edward's entrance is just as deliberate. We see Richard Gere leaning against the railing of a hotel balcony, looking out over the city. His suit is sharp, but his posture is relaxed, suggesting a man who's built a life beyond boardrooms. The lighting softens his features, and when he glances over his shoulder, there's a flicker of the same look he gave Vivian all those years ago, a mix of curiosity, admiration, and a hint of mischief. In that single glance, the chemistry is reignited. The trailer's middle section is a treasure trove of callbacks for fans. There's a brief shot of a jewelry box snapping shut, instantly bringing to mind the famous scene where Edward playfully trapped Vivian's hand inside. Another blink-and-you-miss-it moment shows a red gown hanging on a wardrobe door, the lighting catching it just enough to evoke the memory of Vivian's opera night. But these aren't just nostalgic throw-ins. They seem to carry weight, as if they're tied to key moments in the sequel's plot. One particularly intriguing scene takes place in a high-end boutique. Vivian walks past a display of hats, smiles, and pauses just long enough for the audience to remember her awkward, playful shopping trip in the original. But now her presence in the store feels different, confident, self-assured. The camera lingers on her reflection in a mirror, as if to say she's not the same woman we met on Hollywood Boulevard. This is a Vivian who has grown into her own story. The first look footage also teases moments of tension. A quick cut shows Edward at what appears to be a formal event, looking across the room with a subtle frown. The next shot, Vivian walking away from someone in an evening dress, her expression unreadable. No explanation is given, but the editing hints at a conflict, perhaps old wounds, or the challenge of reconnecting after so many years apart. One of the most powerful shots comes near the end of the footage. Vivian and Edward stand side by side on a rooftop, the city lights stretching out below them. There's no grand gesture, no kiss, just silence, the kind that speaks volumes. It's a visual metaphor for where they are now, two people who've been through decades of life, finding themselves once again in the same place. With the same undeniable connection, the cinematography in this first look is worth noting. The color palette leans heavily into warm tones, gold, cream, deep red, mirroring the emotional warmth of the story while avoiding the overly glossy look of some modern rom-coms. It feels intimate, as though we're being invited into private moments between the characters. Even the camera work has a deliberate slowness, allowing the audience to savor each detail. Perhaps the most exciting thing about this first look is what it doesn't show. We don't see much of the supporting cast, leaving plenty of room for speculation about new characters and subplots. We don't hear a single line of major dialogue, which means the mystery of the sequel's central conflict remains intact. And yet, in just a few minutes of footage, it manages to make one thing crystal clear. Vivian and Edward's story isn't overdone by balancing subtle references to the original with new visual storytelling. The first look footage achieves something rare in sequels. It respects the past while making the future feel irresistible. It leaves fans not just remembering why they loved these characters, but wondering how they'll fall in love with them all over again. Asterisk the full trailer for Pretty Woman 2 wastes no time pulling the audience straight into the heart of its story. It opens with a quiet scene, Vivian walking alone down a cobblestone street in what appears to be a European city. The air is crisp, and she's bundled in a long camel coat, her hair catching the soft morning light. There's a tenderness, too. The moment, a sense of reflection, as if she's far from home but close to something deeply personal. The gentle hum of a piano begins in the background, and if you listen closely, you'll notice it's a slowed, almost wistful variation of the original film's theme. Immediately, you know this is going to be an emotional journey. The next cut changes the mood entirely. We see Edward standing in a bustling New York art gallery, surrounded by vibrant paintings. He's speaking to someone just out of frame, his expression a mix of curiosity and guarded warmth. Then the camera reveals who he's talking to. It's Vivian. The room seems to fade around them as their eyes meet. This is their first on-screen reunion in the trailer, and it's deliberately understated. No dramatic music swell, no over-the-top reactions, just two people with a complicated history, meeting again after what feels like a lifetime. That quiet intensity says more than any scripted line could. From here, the trailer picks up its pace, offering a mosaic of moments that hint at the story's emotional core. There's a shot of Vivian sitting in a cafe, laughing with a younger woman, possibly a daughter, niece, or mentee. We see Edward in a business meeting, clearly distracted, his gaze drifting to a photo on his desk that's just out of focus. Quick cuts suggest both have built full, separate lives, yet something unfinished still lingers between them. One of the most telling sequences comes midway through the trailer. Vivian stands outside a grand hotel, clutching an invitation in her hand. The camera zooms in just enough for us to read part of it, charity gala, benefiting the arts, before she takes a deep breath and steps inside. The next shot shows Edward across the room, already aware she's there. His eyes soften, but there's hesitation too. The background fades into a warm blur, framing them as the only two people who matter in that moment. It's a visual callback to their first dinner together in the original film. Yet here the stakes feel higher. This isn't the start of something, but a chance to decide if they want to rewrite the ending. The trailer doesn't shy away from showing conflict either. In one emotionally charged snippet, Vivian turns away from Edward during a late-night conversation on a terrace, her voice breaking as she says, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." We don't hear his reply. The music swells instead, but the look on his face is one of deep regret. Another quick cut shows Edward alone in a dimly lit office, staring at a letter. These fragments suggest misunderstandings, maybe even past choices that drove them apart. But for every moment of tension, there's a counterbalance of warmth. The trailer gifts us with small, intimate details. A shot of Vivian adjusting Edward's tie before an event, Edward gently taking her hand. As they walk through a crowded street, the two of them laughing over something unseen at a park bench. These aren't grand gestures, but everyday moments that carry the weight of shared history. One particularly striking visual comes toward the end. We see Vivian and Edward on a rooftop terrace at night, the city glowing below them. A soft breeze stirs, and Vivian looks at Edward with the same mix of amusement and challenge she had in 1990. "You still hate heights?" she asks, and this time we hear his reply, "Not when you're here." It's the only moment in the trailer where we get a full exchange of dialogue, and it lands with emotional precision tying back to the original's climactic rescue scene, while signaling that this time they might be facing their fears together. The trailer closes on a lingering shot of them walking away from the camera, side by side, disappearing into a softly lit street. No kiss, no big orchestral crescendo, just a quiet, confident fade to black with the words, "Coming 2026, appearing in elegant script. It's a bold choice, resisting the temptation to give away too much. Instead, it leaves us with the impression that this sequel isn't about recapturing a moment in time, it's about exploring what happens when that moment grows, changes, and survives the years. By structuring the trailer around emotional beats, rather than action-driven plot reveals, the filmmakers are making a clear statement. Pretty Woman 2 is about character, chemistry, and the kind of love story that only works when it's told with patience. Every frame feels intentional, designed to both satisfy longtime fans and intrigue a new generation. And just like the original, it promises a romance that's as much about self-discovery as it is about finding the right person.